Welcome, everybody, to episode 13 of Listen In. They say 13 is an unlucky number, but for me, it's extremely lucky because I have been wanting to have a book club at Sunaparanta for the last 4 years. And finally, I get to have one, and that too during COVID. And I'm sad that it's a virtual one, but it's great that we can connect with all of you from all across the world and authors also from all across the world. I'm very happy that our first book is A Burning by Megha Majumdar. This book has won and continues to win critical acclaim from across the world. It's a novel that offers a portrait of the underbelly and the underclass of large Indian cities with its compelling prose. The novel is set in Kolkata and examines the negotiations that inhabitants of these cities make with capitalism and the complex entangling of religion, gender, caste, economic agency, and class with life in India. Megha will be in conversation with Priyanka Khanna, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of these amazing women. Megha Majumdar was born and raised in Kolkata. She moved to the United States to attend college at Harvard University, where she was a Traub Scholar, followed by graduate school in social anthropology at Johns Hopkins University. She works as an associate editor at Catapult, and in her free time writes books like A Burning. From reading this one, it's hard to tell, but this is her debut novel. Priyanka Khanna grew up in Mumbai and graduated from Hamilton College in New York with a major in sociology and a minor in comparative literature. She's worked for the Hearst Group of magazines and was part of the founding team of Vogue India, where she is currently the fashion features director. She has a loyal following of people who look forward to her Sunday posts featuring new books and trust them as the gospel truth. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Megha, who's going to do a short reading from her book for us, followed by a conversation between her and Priyanka.
Thank you so much, Ishita. Thank you, Leandre. Thank you, Priyanka, for being here. You are all extremely busy people, and I'm so grateful for your thoughtfulness and your care. Thank you, everybody who's joining us at the start of your workday or maybe at the end of your workday. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to read for just a couple minutes from A Burning, and I wish I had the Indian edition to hold up here, but I only have the US edition with me. And after that, as Ishita said, I'm excited to chat with Priyanka. So I'll just read from the beginning. "You smell like smoke," my mother said to me. So I rubbed an oval of soap in my hair and poured a whole bucket of water on myself before a neighbor complained that I was wasting the morning supply. There was a curfew that day. On the main street, a police jeep would creep by every half hour. Daily wage laborers, compelled to work, would come home with arms raised to show they had no weapons. In bed, my wet hair spread on the pillow, I picked up my new phone, purchased with my own salary, screen guard still attached. On Facebook, there was only one conversation. These terrorists attacked the wrong neighborhood. The night before, I had been at the railway station, no more than a 15-minute walk from my house. I ought to have seen the men who stole up to the open windows and threw flaming torches into the halted train. But all I saw were carriages burning, their doors locked from the outside and dangerously hot. The fire spread to huts bordering the station, smoke filling the chests of those who lived there. More than 100 people died. The government promised compensation to the families of the dead, 80,000 rupees, which, well, the government promises many things. In a video to the dozen microphones thrust at his chin, the chief minister was saying, "Let the authorities investigate." Somebody had spliced this comment with a video of policemen scratching their heads. It made me laugh. I admired these strangers on Facebook who said anything they wanted to. They were not afraid of making jokes. Whether it was about the police or the ministers, they had their fun, and wasn't that freedom? I'll stop there.
That was lovely. You know, I think it's always so incredibly fascinating to hear the author say her own words aloud. So thank you for that, Megha. And I'm so excited to be here in conversation And I'm going to dive right in because I know there's so much we have to cover with your incredible book. So tell me, I'm going back to the beginning, and tell me, how did you become a writer?
That's a huge question. You know, I think I probably have to go back to my struggles with learning English when I was a kid. And I had a really hard time becoming comfortable with the language, and I had to go to these like, you know, extra coaching classes to become comfortable with English. And then I started reading books. You know, I read everything I could find, from like, you know, the fairy tales to like, we had these books of Russian folk tales. Of course, we had all of these Indian folk tales, specifically folk tales from Bengal. I remember I had this book which was translated into English. And so reading very widely was, I think, the foundation for this, you know? And then of course I read, I think, the books that many of us here have probably read, you know, like Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys, and a lot of Ruskin Bond, a lot of Tagore's stories, and, you know, everything that we grew up with. And I think that rich mix was how I started becoming aware that English can be a language which fits into any kind of story you want to tell, you know? I think that realization was key. And then of course, you know, I wrote short stories and I wrote essays, but I was a bit of a tinkerer, you know. I would just, I wasn't very serious about it until several years ago, when I felt that I wanted to write this book. And I knew right away that it had to be a book. The idea felt really big and encompassing. And I think in many ways, writing this book gave me the discipline to become a writer, you know, because so much of it is just sitting down before a page which is blank or filled with words that disappoint you, and facing that and trying to make that page better. And you have to do that, you know, 10 times, 50 times, you go over the same page. And I think that discipline is so fundamental to becoming a writer. Yeah. Priyanka, I know that you work at Vogue. Do you write fiction as well?
I hope to one day. That's a dream. But you know, going back to what you said, I can't remember the author who said it when asked about his routine, and he said, you know, it's really about getting your ass, excuse my language, in a chair every day, and that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
I think for all writers out there. But you know, what's interesting to me is to hear you talk about your struggles with English, because when I read this book, I felt that English was sort of the fourth character, you know, after Jeevan and Lovely and P.T. Sir. You know, they all use English as another tool of aspiration. Can you tell us more? Was that sort of obvious for you? Was that drawing on your own experiences with the language?
That's a great observation. I mean, I think I absorbed the lesson really early that you have to learn English in order to move up. You know, I needed to learn English to get into a school. And in that way, English and aspiration and striving just became linked for me in a way that I could never kind of neglect again. And I think that sense of aspiration is present, or was present, not just in my life, but in the lives of so many other people. You know, I read this tremendous book called The Dreamers by Snigdha Poonam. And that book is about millennials in small town India. Ishita, you're nodding, so I think you've read this book too, yeah. And I think one of the chapters is about this person who runs spoken English classes. And it's such a common thing, you know, you have spoken English classes and people go to these. And so the linking of like, you need to learn English no matter what your mother tongue is, and that is what will open all of these opportunities and open all of these doors for you. I think that's a very prevalent idea for many of us in India. And I wanted to have that aspect of aspiration in this book, because this book is so much about people who want something better, people who want to move up despite many kinds of institutional barriers.
Aspirations plays such an important part of this book. It's something you've touched upon, and you have, Jivan, who just wants to be this middle class girl with her income, Lovely, who wants to be this film star, known, and PT Sir, who wants his voice to sort of matter and to be heard. How did you create these different narratives and, touch upon all these themes? Because they're so multi-layered, and I'm just crucial to how you sort of approach that.
Part of my aim with this book was to really write something that felt complex. That was so much what I worked toward, is how do I write these people who, yes, they face certain barriers, and, there are ways in which they navigate, all of these systems that don't serve them and in fact constantly challenge them. But also I wanted to write these three people who are much more than their struggles. They are people who joke and tease and love and watch TV, and, there is fun in their lives. And that felt really important. How can I write these three people? Because so much of what fiction does is not hit the reader over the head with whatever lesson you want them to take or anything like that, but allowing a reader to feel close to these characters. And if the reader feels close to these characters, if the reader trusts that these characters are who they are on the page, then you can kind of take them through this experience, and you can allow the reader to ask themselves, well, how would I act? How would I face this dilemma? What moral choices would I make? And that is so much more powerful than having a book which, is much more explicit in any kind of moral lesson. So creating those rich characters felt like part of my argument, if fiction can be said to have some kind of argument. And I really want to turn some of this question back to you, Priyanka, because I am so curious to hear about your work. And I think I heard you say, I think during our prep call, maybe we were talking about this, that you work with fashion, but it's that same kind of sly movement where what you're talking about is so much more than garments. Can you talk about what fashion means to you and like storytelling in that space?
I'm actually you're a social anthropologist. I'm a sociology major. And I think, I've always had this interest in fashion, but I wanted to look at it from a larger perspective. I think that's more interesting. And that's what the writers I admire have always done. Where we are today in a pandemic, there is, when we look back, or generations after us look back, this will be the moment in fashion where everyone wore comfortable clothes and at leisure because they were home. It's the whole, there was a hemline theory back in the day. Now it's the waistline theory. So I think, putting it in a larger context is what's so exciting. I mean, right now in what's happening in the States, with all the candidates and the conversations around what they're wearing, which of course peaked with Hillary, 4 years ago, I think it says so much more about the choice that goes into their clothes, whether it's the royals who send a message in a particular way, or Kamala Harris, putting out her sort of a look, which is, with her Converse shoes, with her very, business suit. I think there's so much more to fashion. And, what we were talking about for all our viewers out there is the idea that it's so exciting that we're at a moment where art doesn't have to be critical and not commercial, it's bridged that divide. It can be intellectual as well as entertaining. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from your book, because both Ishita and I spoke about how we couldn't put it down. We sort of binged read it. I know I know binge watching TV shows were, sort of your inspiration. So take us through how, you sort of approached the pacing of this book.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because that was part of my aim too. It was the challenge that I set myself is, can I write a book which puts forward intellectually serious ideas, but also is really fun to read, a book that you can come home after work and pick up instead of turning to Netflix. And I think I found inspiration in TV shows, because I think this phenomenon of binge watching TV shows, I think there are really important craft lessons there, because what those people working on those shows have done is craft a story which moves in such a way where you are so invested in the characters. The reason why you click like next episode or whatever is because you need to know what happens to this person. So what are the ways in which they use openings and endings? What are the ways in which scenes move within an episode, and the ways in which episodes move throughout the arc of a show? I think paying attention to that kind of movement, how does dialogue work? How are characters, emotional registers changing over the course of an episode? So paying attention to all of that, I found really helpful to see what it is that keeps someone so invested in a story. And, of course, I have to add the note that a book is not a TV show. They have, a book is able to be close to a character's consciousness, and a book is able to do things with language that, of course, a TV show cannot. So very aware that they are very different media, but I think there are definitely lessons that we can learn.
So I have to ask you, are there plans to make The Burning, to bring it to screen? Is that something that is on the cards, or would you like for it to be on the cards for you?
I hope it gets made. It has been optioned, so fingers crossed it will get made.
Amazing. Is there anything you can share with us at this moment?
I don't think there's anything specific that I can share, but I'm keeping fingers crossed that it does get made, because I would love to see it on the screen.
Oh, that's great. And I have to ask you, what have you binged watched recently?
I know that I was talking about dramas, and I guess at the time I was watching shows like Mad Men, probably. And I loved Broadchurch. Did you watch that one? It was so good. So shows like that is what I was referring to. But actually during the pandemic, I've been watching more cooking shows. And I think it's been so relaxing, just like watching a cooking show while you're cooking something that is, much less magnificent. But like having that inspiration is really fun. And I've been watching this show called Nadia's Time to Eat, which is on Netflix here. And it's this British chef, and her whole thing is, how can busy people find time to cook? So she's all about shortcuts and hacks and all of that stuff. And in every episode, she will research an ingredient like mushrooms or sugar. And it's so cool. It's really fun. What have you been watching?
What have I been watching? Oh, God, I don't think you want to know. I don't have a public platform. Let's just put it like this. A lot of reality TV. I think at the end of the day, after my day job and my 2 children who are lovely but exhausting, I don't have the mind space. And I'm trying to read. So, your book was great because it sort of drew me in immediately. So I try to read a lot. And when I have the mind space at the moment, I'm spending it on guilty pleasures. Let's just put it
no guilt, all pleasure. It makes so much sense. Yeah.
But take us through what you've been doing for the last few months. So is there anything you've perfected cooking? Are you writing? Can you tell us a little bit about your next project?
Oh my God, the last few months have been so strange. I think they've been strange for all of us. Part of it has been the uncertainty, of not knowing when the pandemic will ease and when we might go back to work. I've been super busy doing publicity work for the book. And I've been so glad for virtual events like this one. It's been really incredible, to have events, not just in the US, but of course in India. I've done a few things for the Australian release. So it's been really cool to get on Zoom and meet people and have these conversations and to have a sense for what people are bringing to the book, and what is speaking to them. And I have been cooking. I have been working very slowly on a second novel. It's hard to make the time. I think in the beginning of the pandemic, there was kind of this myth that like, oh, now we're home. We all have so much time. We can fulfill all our dreams and do everything that we ever wanted to do. But I think that totally left out the very real stress of living like this, where we are mostly at home, not seeing our friends, not seeing family. And I think that stress is, at least now in late August, I think we're all feeling that stress and that exhaustion. Yeah. What have you been doing, Priyanka? Have you found ways to cope and move forward and get rest in addition to a lot of reality TV?
So, I have a small baby. So my days I have a small baby and a 5-year-old. So my days sort of revolve around them. And, I have to say I'm very grateful because with my daughter, I went back to full-time work at 3 months when she was 3 months old. So I'm glad to sort of be home with them, have this time. And, so I'm trying to look at that as sort of the positivity as someone who's, worked always. I think that to me has been sort of a way to be calm. And, I'm actually quite happy being home. I think now I'm missing seeing friends. So we're, slowly starting to, see family members, etc. But otherwise, I think I'm still in the post new mom nesting mode. But I want to go back to, because, talking about the fact that, it must be strange to have a debut book come out in a pandemic. Has there been any aspect about this that you've struggled with?
I still haven't.
I'm sure you didn't envision it like this, of course, so.
Yeah. I still haven't seen my book in a bookstore. And that was something that I was really looking forward to, is I just wanted to go into a bookstore and see my book, on the table or on a shelf. And I know that a few bookstores have like cautiously opened here in New York, but I think I am definitely being very, very careful and avoiding being in indoor spaces unless absolutely necessary. So I haven't gone to any bookstores yet. So that's been really strange, and I think it's been a little hard, the removal of the sense of place, because I had a book tour planned where I was going to go to all of these cities, and I was so excited to visit some of these cities for the first time, places like Seattle where I'd never been. And I was very excited to have conversations which would be grounded and, in that place, and be in conversation with people who are gathering in a room in a particular place. And, there are particular things happening in that city, stuff that's on people's minds. And I think I was really looking forward to having those specific grounded conversations. And while I'm so grateful for Zoom and Crowdcast and the opportunity to have these conversations at all, I do think that that removal of sense of place has been a little hard. I wish I could, for example, see everybody in the room, I wish I could have conversations that are specific to where we are. So maybe we would have been in Goa, or maybe we would have been in Mumbai. And, so that I miss being in a particular place.
No, the physical interaction, of course, nothing
Yeah.
I think replaces that.
Yeah.
But having said that, you've done incredible press and you've gotten incredible press about this book. So I wanted to ask you, what's the one question you haven't been asked that you're surprised you haven't been asked about the book?
That is an excellent question. I think I think only 2 people in all of my events have asked me anything about the character in the book who is a guava seller, who is, one of my favorites. I really enjoyed writing him. It's a minor character, so it kind of makes sense. But that kind of minor character, I paid so much attention to, because I felt like it was such a huge part of building this rich fictional world where you can see the minor characters, where you can see the guava seller who sits at, the end of your street, and, you have a relationship with them, and, sometimes they give you good fruit and sometimes they give you poor quality fruit, and you have this joking relationship with them. So that kind of relationship and spirit and fabric of a neighborhood was really important to me to write. Yeah.
Do you miss your characters? I asked this because I was talking to an author a few days ago, and she said that she missed her characters once, the book was sort of out there in the world. Do you feel the same way?
I think I'm really happy to kind of let them have their own life. It is a little strange to think that I spent 4 years kind of obsessing about these characters and, thinking about how to move them and where I would leave them and where I would end the book and that kind of thing. And now to just let that go feels a little strange. I think just to see the book as a finished object feels a little strange, because every time I pick it up, even now for the reading, I can show you, I have all of these marks in my book for stuff that I've crossed out because, I just want to keep editing it. And so to acknowledge that I have to let it go, it's done now, feels strange for sure.
I can imagine that. I really can't imagine that.
I was going to ask you, since you're such a big reader, do you ever feel that you miss characters after you've kind of turned the last pages? Are there characters who stay with you?
Yes, I think so. I think, it's impossible to sort of not get drawn into the world. And I think that's the magic of writing, and a good writer, bringing you into that whole world. I think one of the books that really sort of I thought was one of the most fascinating characters I'd read recently was an Edith Wharton book, which I hadn't read before, The Custom of the Country. And I thought she was just so incredibly, just because it was written so many years ago, but you could totally see a character, like that today. She was sort of the original Gossip Girl, in a way. I think that's what's amazing about talented writers like yourself, is really building, like you said, the fabric and building that whole environment. So I know you grew up in Kolkata. So how much of the whole write what you know is sort of theory you ascribe to?
I believe in writing what you want to know. A lot of this book definitely draws on my understanding from growing up in Kolkata, and just, the particular intelligence of people that I saw around me, the sense of humor that I saw around me. I drew on that for sure. But I also think this book was driven by a question, which was, how do people hold on to big ambitions and hold on to big dreams when they are living within systems that don't serve them? And so the whole book was about exploring this question. I think so many of the books that I love, if the writer is fully staying in the zone of what they have already decided and what they are sure that they fully know and understand, then I don't know that there's any kind of challenge there. I don't know that there's a fuel there, because a book is a way of asking something, right? So I think that question has to be there, and there has to be enough of a sense of exploration and going somewhere that feels like a discovery for the writer too.
You say, one of the Jivan says, and I'm reading from the book, said, these things happen when you are a woman. She narrates about her fellow inmates who are victims. Do you think as a female writer, you were better placed to get into the heads of your female characters?
Absolutely. Something that I was very aware of is the way in which I think many of us who grew up girls in India are aware of the shame that this society seeks to put on you. Everything from being very aware of what you're wearing when you're in public, to, I remember when we were, I think in middle school, my friends and I were, it was part of our very common shared experience to be, touched and harassed on public transport, on the buses where we went to and from school on buses. And so all of these buses, it was so common. And, initially, I think there was such a sense of shock to realize that somebody could do that to you. But then we started talking about it, and we started, encouraging each other to speak up when something like that happened. We told each other, what to say and what we had said when that happened to us. And so I think that sense of you have to push back against the shame that this society wants you to, take on the burden of. You have to speak up on a bus and say, what are you doing? Like, keep your hands to yourself, that courage and that shame was definitely a huge part of writing the characters in this book. And the truthfulness of that was really important to me.
Speaking up again, of course, is how the book really starts. Like Jivan's whole sort of character, her whole arc goes kind of awry because of speaking up on social media. And, we see now, especially where we are in India today, that trial by social media is trial by law in a way, it's superseding that. So how representative do you think it is of India at this moment, given that, you sort of have perspective now that you're living away? So
I'll speak to that, but then I want to come back to you, Priyanka, because you also have the experience of living in both countries, and I really want to ask you about your thoughts when you went away and then returned. But I think that it's definitely for readers to determine how representative it is and how much of a correspondence they see. A lot of this book has been nourished by good journalism. A lot of what I've written about, I have been able to write about because of this accumulation of years of reading the news and following the news, and just some things really sticking with me. For example, there is a scene in the book of a slum demolition. And that was something that I remember reading about when I was a kid. I was pretty young. And I read about this in the news, and I read about how the residents of the slum fought back and used the only resources that they had. And that really stayed with me and kind of made it into this book. So yeah, I think good reporting is a lot of what this book draws on. Tell me about your experience going away and kind of reflecting on Indian realities and then coming back.
I went away when I was 18. So of course I was a lot, sort of younger. And at that time, it's, I guess, the selfishness of youth in a way. I looked at it more sort of the microcosm of my world, which was like, stepping away from sort of my family and seeing it in a new light, and carving your own independence. And I was raised to be pretty independent, though I am very codependent on my parents, but to be, very independent career-wise and, make those decisions on my own. And I think going away sort of solidified the idea that you really can do anything you want, because like you said, in India, there are certain rules and there are certain ways, and, there are certain things you're expected to be or sort of fit a mold. And I think, when I went away, it was, a way to see that there's a larger sort of picture that you can create for yourself that you don't really have to fit into. And I think for me, it was more of a personal journey at that point. I think, as you get older, you sort of see it from a different lens, a more cultural lens. You see it you look at your country from a different political lens. But at that point, very honestly, for me, it was more looking at it in my own little bubble. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel that your time away still shapes how you think about, media and storytelling and your work?
Totally. I think, I learned so much, and, it was always my dream actually to go back to do my master's. And it was actually something I was discussing with my husband recently. And, he laughed and he said, maybe you should have reconsidered before you had 2 children. But, I think at that time it was really about getting that hands-on experience. And I think that has informed my storytelling in a very different way than going to school might have. Not to say one is better than the other, but I think, it's the sliding doors kind of situation, right? Like, where would I have been if I had gone back to school and, done my master's as opposed to where I am now? So I think that does inform. And talking about, speaking about sort of next chapters, where do you think Lovely and PT Sir end up? Like, if you had to write a sequel, what would they be? Where would you see them?
It's funny that you asked, because I actually wrote quite a bit beyond what is in the book, because I was searching for a good place to leave these characters that would be, satisfying for a reader who has followed their whole journey, but not overly tidy. I wanted the ending to have complexity as well. So, I mean, I think I'll put it this way. I definitely want the reader to kind of have their own imagination of where these characters end up, but I do think that it was important to me to indicate that any degree of success that they do get is not uncomplicated. It's not, there's no such thing as like a pure and simple success. I think all success is polluted by their complicity in certain things, by their regrets and disappointments and their doubts about the ways in which they acted morally or immorally. So I think that kind of mixed sense of moving forward, but it's never simple, was really, really important to me.
I actually loved how you brought out the moral complexity of making decisions. Do you do it for yourself? Do you do it for someone else? How do you push yourself further without hurting the person around you? I know we have time for only 2 more questions before we open up to the audience. So I want to ask you, what would your advice be to young writers who are sort of looking to find their own voice? Because as an editor in your day job, what are the stories that excite you and that you're attracted to?
That's a great question. And I will turn this one back to you too. But I will say that I think when I'm reading a manuscript that is on submission, one of the questions that I always ask is, what is this book excited about? It's very important to get a sense for what is the energy and fuel behind this book. What is it that makes this book urgent, or why does this book need to exist? There are so many good books in the world. What is this book bringing to the conversation? So I think that sense of what is this book excited about is very important to me, because you can have manuscripts that allow you to follow the narrative. You follow that it's a story about a friendship or about a dilemma at a workplace or whatever it is. But if you can't tell why the writer is writing this story, then there's something about that book that always falls a little flat for me. So that's an important question. And, I would say for writers who are, early in their careers and just kind of starting to write, um, I would say that the greatest place to learn is by reading, reading widely and reading whatever you are drawn to, whether that's fiction or nonfiction or, sci-fi or mysteries or whatever it is that you are drawn to. I would heed that curiosity and follow that curiosity. And then at some point you might see that you are not just reading the stories as they are presented, but you are able to kind of pay attention to the choices that the writer made. You are able to think about, well, why does the book start in this place? Why does it skip forward 20 years? So you can kind of think about those questions and learn craft lessons as you're reading the books that you enjoy. Yeah. What advice do you have, Priyanka?
Actually, the same. I would say read widely. I think, what you learn from the words, it doesn't matter if you're writing for a magazine, you're writing for a newspaper, you're writing a book, you're writing a play. I think it's just really about just the use of language, which I think is so important, and that informs your work, whichever sort of medium you choose. And I'm still, even in this digital age, a die-hard print fan across all spectrums. So, I think reading a lot, and I think just sort of having a larger picture, like I was saying, fashion shouldn't really be seen in isolation. So that to me is exciting when young writers pitch me, is how they've sort of seen it fitting into life for their personal lives, or also into sort of the cultural fabric where we are in. Going back to your whole process, I want to end on sort of the last question. How did you decide that it was time to put your pen down? Like, how did you decide to start? Number one, did you start with a character, or did you start on sentence level? And then how did you decide to put your pen down, so to speak?
How did I put my pen down? I love how you worded that. That's so beautiful. I think it started from a place of anger and alarm, really, and just seeing the ways in which what I was reading in the news about India just did not feel like the country that I had grown up knowing, the country that I was taught to love in all its diversity. And so I think that place of thinking about what is happening and how are people supposed to move forward through this, that was kind of the fuel for me. And then I had these three characters with whom I could ask that question with more intricacy. And then how did I decide to end? I think this might be helpful for other writers watching too, but the first time that I thought my draft was done, it wasn't done. So I put it down and, I picked it up and I looked at it after maybe a month or 2 months. And I saw so many things that I wanted to change and fix and move. And then I did those, I put it down again, and it still wasn't done. So I think having those gaps was really helpful, places where I put the manuscript down, stepped away from it. And when I came back, I could look at it once again as any reader might. So having those fresh eyes was really important. And I kind of decided to let it go when I felt that it wasn't perfect. There will never be a perfect manuscript, but it was in a place where I was proud of it. And even though I could see that it was still imperfect, I didn't know how to do any more work on it. I had done everything that I could think to do. I had polished every sentence and taken it to kind of, the highest place that I could. And then it was time to kind of, talk to my agent and talk to my editor and go there. So, yeah.
Well, I think you did a great job. So I don't think there's much left to fix.
Super. Thank you, Priyanka and Megha, for that. I'm going to switch to some of the questions we're getting in. Megha, a few people said that they really loved hearing you read. So if we can enable that happening during a pandemic, that's been great. So we don't have the bookstore for you, but we do have this, so that's quite lovely. And another few people who said that they couldn't put the book down as well. So that was a wild success, I think, on your part.
Thank you.
There's a question in terms of which Tagore story impacted you most as a writer?
That's a lovely question. And I think the story that comes to mind this morning for me is, I think it's the one called Chuti. It's a story of a kid who is this kind of mischievous kid in a village. His mother is just exasperated, cannot deal with him anymore. And he gets a chance to go and live in the city with his uncle. And he goes, and eventually, you know, over the course of the story, you realize that this kid, his spirit and his mischief is just kind of worn down by feeling like a burden in his uncle's home. And then it has a really kind of tragic end. And I think what I love about that story is just the rich sentiment of it. You know, in the beginning, this kid is just so annoying and you kind of side with the mother and you're like, what is this kid doing? But then as the story goes on, you understand that this kid has a rich inner life, that he has kind of these deep reserves of love and a wish to be loved in a family, which he's not getting. Anyway, I think it's a masterful story.
The next one is for somebody who wants to write a book someday. Would you give them a few tips on how to combat writer's block, and how would one go about approaching a publisher or finding one?
Writer's block. I think the only way around it is to try different things. So if you are working on a book and you feel that, you know, you're stuck where you are, maybe it's helpful to take a few steps back and think about, well, why is my character feeling stuck? Why is it that I can't move forward? So maybe instead of making my character, you know, walk down the street and visit their friend, I want my character to go to the market to buy vegetables, and then they bump into someone there. So, you know, there are different ways to enter a story, and I would think about all the different ways. And then approaching a publisher, so the first piece of advice I would have is to make sure that your book is absolutely the strongest that you can make it. I'm not sure if this is how it works in India, but here you don't approach a publisher directly. What you do is query a literary agent, and you sign with a literary agent who represents you to publishers. So once you have an agent, your agent will help you kind of navigate this and make sure your manuscript goes on submission to the editors who will connect with it and that kind of thing. But absolutely the most important thing you can do, and the thing that I told myself is, you know, I have one shot at submitting my manuscript, you know? So I really wanted to make it the strongest possible manuscript, spend so much time on it, step away from it, come back to it. There's no rush, you know, just make the book the strongest it can be.
The next one is, what is your favorite, or which is your favorite book by an Indian or global author? Or maybe let's say 3 books, because 1 is hard.
Yeah, so I can talk about a couple books that I have loved recently, and I have them here actually. This one is called A House is a Body. It's by Shruti Swami, and it just came out. It's a collection of short stories, and it's just so sophisticated, so original. Each story makes you feel like you have to sit there in silence with the story, and just kind of sit with it. Really beautiful short stories for anybody who's a fan of stories. I really loved this book by Anuradha Roy. It's called The Folded Earth, which is about a woman who, after a tragedy, moves to this small town in the Himalayas. And what I love about this book is how it is so beautifully about the life of this town, the people who live there, but also about the nature, you know, the forests and the hills around. It's just all this rich, beautiful whole. Um, and then this other novel that I will recommend is Devi Laskar's. It has a beautiful cover. I don't know if you can see it. The Atlas of Reds and Blues. And it's a novel that is set in the US about an Indian American person who is shot by the police in her driveway. And as she is, you know, lying there wounded, she thinks about the course of her life and everything that has brought her to that moment.
I know Priyanka and I are both putting those on our next read immediately. So I hope everyone here is doing that as well. The next one goes back to craft, which is that do you think the end product of your book or what you envisioned it to be is what it actually turned out to be? And, you know, how do you kind of adjust to your book taking on an evolution of its own? So are you very strict with an outline? How do you manage changes that maybe your characters are going through as you write?
I think a huge part of the fun of writing a book is that sense of discovery, is of your book surprising you and your characters displaying intuitions that you didn't manufacture. So I think I don't remember having an outline. I don't think I had an outline. I think I just kind of wrote and saw what emerged. And I think that suppleness and that flexibility is absolutely crucial. Perhaps there's a way to like have an outline and still allow some room for surprise. But I think that surprise is absolutely key. And I think it's very normal for your book to change and really shift gears several times as you're writing it. In the beginning, you might think, you know, I'm writing a book about, you know, a tiger that lives in a zoo. And then by the end of it, you might find that you're writing a book about, you know, a tiger who is in the Sundarbans. So like, you know, your book might change quite a bit and you have to be open to those changes. That's part of the fun of writing a book.
Next one is also kind of about craft, which is that while you are writing about something that's either happening in present day or historically, do you find it a challenge to put that into fiction?
I think fiction can be a way of engaging with the events and happenings that intrigue you. So, you know, it's not a matter of looking at what happened or looking at something in the news and then, you know, just kind of trying to map it onto fiction, but taking that event or taking that article in the news as a starting point. Maybe there's something in that event which really intrigued you, you know, something about it that snagged your attention. And then you can think about, well, what was it that I so was drawn to? And then you can kind of explore that, you know, so you can take somebody who in a history book might be considered a minor character, often a woman, and you can write fiction that explores how their life might have been, you know? So that is the power of fiction, is to go into the places, the overlooked places, and to follow what catches your attention.
This one is pertaining to a character in your book, actually, and your craft. So it's balancing both. It's, you know, there is a whole controversy in the book about someone who posts something on Facebook and gets into trouble unwittingly. And as you were writing, did you feel that you were at all censoring yourself or questioning what you were writing, just given current circumstances, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, that it is a very plausible situation that you can get into trouble for views posted online or in person or in any kind of print?
I think it's impossible to write from a place of trying to be neutral. That is not a rich place for fiction. Fiction always comes from a place of powerful feeling, and a certain kind of fearlessness, I think. And so, no, I wasn't really thinking about it. I knew that this was the book that I needed to write. And I guess if other people had a problem with it, I assumed that they were free to write their own fiction, you know? So I wrote the book that I could be proud of and the book in which I felt free to write what I wanted to write.
And I'm going to end with this one, which is, are you planning to write another book? I know you said you're working on something, and is it fiction or nonfiction?
I'm working on a novel, so it's fiction, and it's very different from A Burning, but yeah, you know, every book has its own challenges and questions, so I'm very much in the early stages of figuring it out, but thank you so much for asking.
Great. And thank you, Megha, and thank you, Priyanka. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much. Thank you.